Welcome to a very frigid Thursday. It's November 17th, 2022, your Day Weather Podcast, brought to you by Cowboy State Daily. Check them out at cowboystatedaily.com or on their Facebook page. Also brought to you by Chugwater Chili, the gourmet spice of Western life. Use the code ChugwaterDon at checkout and get 20% off at chugwaterchili.com. Well, the Arctic chill is here. It's descending on not only the west, but it's going to go across the whole nation here over the next several days. We already have hazardous travel. If you have to travel today anywhere in the region, allow extra time. As we mentioned yesterday, this is not a big snowstorm, but it's just enough with the cold to make it really tricky out there. Some areas are going to go below zero tonight. Some of you, especially in the valleys, will go below zero again Friday night. Then there's a slow moderation in temperatures this weekend, and the forecast for the weekend is going to be a dry one across the west. Going to talk a little bit about Buffalo, New York, and lake effect snows. Why? Because there's a lot of Buffalo Bill fans out there, and it's also something cool to talk about because it's going to get kind of crazy in the Great Lakes this weekend and really over the next couple of days through the weekend. Travel weather for you folks taking a look at the Thanksgiving travel period. Travel weather still looks good Saturday through Tuesday. We do have a system Tuesday night and Wednesday that could bring a little bit of weather. We'll take a closer look at that tomorrow. And we teased you with this yesterday. I'm going to talk about whether or not the big volcanic eruption in the South Pacific earlier this year may have an impact on our weather this winter. So geek alert. So this podcast is going to be a little longer than normal. When we get to the volcano part, you can come back and watch it later. But a lot of weather geeky alerts coming our way with that outlook. Now, taking a look at the satellite imagery this morning, you can see the jet stream right here with those high clouds carving out the trough. All the blue here showing the low stratus clouds, really showing the cold air coming on in and the light snow developing along and behind the front. It'll take a while, but the cold air will get over the Continental Divide and will spill into southwestern Wyoming, parts of northwest Colorado, bringing a little bit of light snow and cold. But basically, when you get these Arctic boundaries, they're just going to go right along the divide. Some Arctic air spills over the divide if it's deep enough, and it will. And then the cold air is just going to spread all the way to the Gulf Coast, and the rest of the United States gets to share in the joy of this Arctic chill. Here's I-80 this morning near Arlington, around the Elk Mountain area. So you can see just a joyful drive this morning for many of you. There's the 500 millibar chart showing that structure to the pattern. And this is the temperature anomaly by 5 p.m. today. So you can see the cold has really gotten its fingers into just about everywhere. And this is by noon tomorrow. The cold air expands and goes more south and more east. And then by the weekend, you can see the coldest of the year is now going to be more in the south and the east. Still colder than the 30-year average in the west, but moderating temperatures some. This is what we showed you yesterday. It looks very close. There really hasn't been much of a change. Right along the northern front range of Colorado and the southern Wyoming, this is where I-80 and I-25 going to be a problem for you travelers today through evening and into early tonight. But elsewhere, we have closures along Interstate 90 because of accidents, and the mountain passes are going to do well. And then when we take a look at that snow liquid ratio that we showed you yesterday, fine pattern champagne snow just going to fall very heavily in the mountains of southern Wyoming and northern Colorado in this pattern. So if you're a cross-country skier, boy, head up to the mountains around Estes Park or the Snowy Range or the Sierra Madres or around Steamboat, and you're going to have a lot of champagne powder to go play in. As we look ahead into the forecast, this is by next Tuesday night. We showed you this yesterday. A more mild westerly Pacific flow comes in. The cold core of the Arctic outbreak goes more to the east and northeast. But notice this little dip right here. Well, that's a bit of a trough, a front coming off the Pacific. So we'll need to watch the Pacific Northwest, Northern California, into the interior west, looking at some snow chances Tuesday night and Wednesday. And it may come in during the day Wednesday along and east of the divide. So we're going to kind of watch this time frame for Wednesday to see what happens with that system. This system may end up becoming a large storm in the Midwest and the Northeast Thanksgiving weekend, which could spell travel headaches, especially for connecting flights. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. Lake effect snows. So, got an email this morning saying, hey, What's it look like for the Buffalo Bills game on Sunday? They are hearing there's a lot of snow coming to the Great Lakes. Well, that's exactly what's going to happen. This current cold air mass, this Arctic outbreak that we have now, is going to translate across the Dakotas, into the upper Midwest. Then it's going to go into the Great Lakes region. And what you're seeing here, I show you sea surface temperatures all the time. Well, what about the sea surface temperatures or lake surface temperatures in the Great Lakes? Does that play a role in the weather? Absolutely it does. So you can see that the lake temperatures, the big lakes, Erie, Ontario, Huron, and Michigan there, all have lake temperatures that are a bit above average. Now, this means temperatures are actually, those lake temperatures are only in the 50s. But when you take air that's in the teens and single digits over those warmer water temperatures, boom, you get these lake effect snows. Only the eastern side of Lake Superior is a little bit colder than average. So take Arctic air, push it over these relatively warmer waters, and you're going to get yourself into a situation where you're going to get heavy lake effect snows. This is the snowfall forecast through Monday morning. So places like Buffalo, Watertown, then look at the snow amounts here as you look at the very, very heavy snowfall that could be falling on the lee of the lakes. Now, a lot of this snow is actually going to fall probably between Friday and Saturday, and tonight into Saturday, maybe peeling back a little bit on Sunday. This is the National Weather Service forecast for Buffalo. Look at this. I love this. Snow could be heavy at times tonight with thunder possible. Now, if you're a snow lover, how could it be more fun than having snow with thunder? Well, that's going to be happening tonight in Buffalo. The snow continues to be heavy. Now, for football fans, it's down to more of occasional snow showers, but still, snow squalls Sunday are going to be a possibility. All right, now we're heading into the weather geek mode. This is where you can tune out if you don't want to hear a lot of nerdy stuff. But we do want to talk about what we teased about yesterday, which is, will that big volcanic explosion possibly affect the winter weather across the world because of the volcanic ash, the water that went into the atmosphere, the sulfur dioxide, all those things that come from volcanoes? Because the Tonga explosion, that volcanic eruption in January, was massive in terms of how far it got into the atmosphere. So I want to thank John Masters, a podcast listener, to pointing me to an article that he found that talks about possibly what the impacts of this volcanic eruption could have on our weather and our climate going here into the following months, especially the important winter situation that we're in right now. So here's a satellite image of that volcanic eruption that poured on through. So I need to give credit where credit is due. A lot of this information I'm showing you came from this website. It's a great website if you want to follow the weather in Europe. And speaking of Europe, they're about ready to see some really cold weather here soon. That'll be something to talk about later. So when you take a look at this volcanic eruption, you have to put it in perspective. The volcanic plume reached 36 miles into the atmosphere. That is as high as the mesosphere. The mesosphere is above the stratosphere. So you're talking about a volcanic eruption that got much higher than even Mount Pinatubo did early in the 2000s. Not only did you have sulfur dioxide and other aerosols, but this is what's critical. Since the beginning of the satellite era, this is the most amount of water that was pushed into the stratosphere that we've seen since we've had satellites. And if you were to try to measure it, the stratosphere had a 10% increase in total water vapor content. That is huge. That is an immense amount of water vapor going to the stratosphere. We've never seen this before or been able to observe it. So what you have is a situation where we're observing what's going to happen, and we can only make some educated guesses on what may happen. Since we haven't seen this before, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But we have seen, by as early as July, a cooling effect in the stratosphere because of all of that water vapor. So if you look at the total mass of water vapor that got thrown in by the eruption, this is days since eruption down here at the bottom. You can see it's gone up into the stratosphere and stays. The stratosphere does not mix very much with the atmosphere above or below it. So once things get put in the stratosphere, they stay there. And so if you look at the stratospheric temperature anomaly, you can see, because the Tonga explosion was right around this general vicinity here. In the southern hemisphere, the stratosphere has a cold anomaly right here. You can see basically the upper level winds in the stratosphere picked up that water vapor and pushed it across the globe. Now, it has stayed for most of the year, that water vapor, in the stratosphere south of the equator. This line right here is the equator. However, notice, recently, that water vapor has made its way now into the lower latitudes of the northern hemisphere, as far south as Mexico and South Florida. So it's now beginning to enter into the northern hemisphere. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, correlation does not mean direct cause and effect. As I told you earlier, we don't know exactly what the impacts could be this winter, because one thing may lead to another thing that we don't really understand. There could be some feedback effects that we don't understand. But the one thing that we do know is that in other volcanic eruptions, we have seen other patterns evolve when they're this big. But we've got to do more research. So it is hard to give you a definitive answer, but we can give you some educated guesses. And one of the educated guesses is the possible correlation to what's called the North Atlantic Oscillation. We've been talking about the Eastern Pacific Arctic Oscillation. We've been talking about other Arctic oscillations and Pacific oscillations that affect the weather in the Western Hemisphere. But what we don't necessarily talk about, because it doesn't impact the West as much, is the North Atlantic Oscillation. This is like the Eastern Pacific Oscillation. It really dictates where the cold and the warm and where the storms and the high pressure systems are going. But one thing where there might be a correlation is if the stratosphere has gotten colder because of all that water vapor and sulfur dioxide and ash going into the stratosphere, you could end up with a negative phase of the North Atlantic Oscillation. This could be a big player this winter, because if this negative phase ends up happening, and by the way, the forecast is for it to go into a negative phase over the next 10 to 15 days, then this is what we have some correlation with. So if you look at November to February, negative North Atlantic oscillations, anywhere you see the blue or the green, the temperature anomaly is for it to be colder than average. This is why this could be very important this winter. So see the dark blues and the greens? That means a colder than average temperature regime from February and from November through February. All of this up here means a lot of high pressure, basically forcing the colder latitude air further south into Europe, the North Atlantic, and a large part of North America. So if this volcanic eruption makes it easier for a North Atlantic Oscillation to be in its negative phase, it's a cold signal. Even though, believe it or not, a colder stratosphere should mean a warmer troposphere. But there's a lot of moving parts to this, and I don't want to get too crazy. Now, one thing I want to show you, which is really, really interesting, I want you to look at the lower right-hand corner here. This is a tool that comes out several times a day that tries to make its best estimate on what the global temperature situation is on the ground, the surface temperature, at any given time throughout the course of the days ahead. And the average temperature is basically the average temperature of the Earth. Again, it's not exact, but it's a guide. Notice this is Friday, October 21st. Notice the average temperature as I go forward here. So this is Friday, October 21st. This is Saturday, November 5th. And then this is just this past Tuesday. So what we're seeing is the average temperature, global average temperatures, have dropped over the last several weeks. Now you might say, well, of course it's dropping. It's becoming winter. Well, it is becoming winter in the northern hemisphere, but the southern hemisphere is into their spring season. So what we're seeing is a drop. Now, whether or not that drop in temperature we can strongly correlate to the volcanic eruption, don't know. Like I said, we got a lot to learn. But if we do end up with that negative North Atlantic Oscillation, that is, again, yet another cold signal for a colder winter in parts of the northern hemisphere, especially parts of Central North America and parts of Europe. Have yourself a good Thursday. We'll see you.